Hi class, welcome to week 4. This week begins a block on writing about somebody else's writing. So far you have written a description paper and you have done an analysis of a visual object, an advertisement. Beginning this week we're going to transfer those skills into writing about somebody else's writing. In other words, we're going to learn how to summarize, i.e. describe somebody else's writing to another audience, and analyze it. For these 4 weeks, as we work on writing, we'll be using one text, that is Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, which is, as you'll see, is a rather useful article for writing about. But anyway, you're going to begin by summarizing Dr. Martin Luther King's argument. So let's talk about what that means and why we even bother to do that. Why do we quote, paraphrase, or summarize? Now, most students think that bringing in somebody else's writing weakens their own because it shows on originality, but that is not the case. In fact, bringing in somebody else's writing can improve your credibility. One of the reasons that it does that is that it provides context. You know, when you bring in quotes from outside of your own mind or outside of the paper, you show your reader where your writing and your ideas sit in relationship to other ideas. Right? Also, it demonstrates to your reader that most writing exists as part of a larger conversation. If you bring in quotes from outside sources, it shows your reader that you are aware of this larger conversation and that your writing is responsibly engaging, or let's say entering that conversation. Obviously, we quote, paraphrase, or summarize to support our arguments, but we don't want to, most students know that, but there's ways that we can use other writings, other ideas in much more sophisticated ways, right? Any kind of writing we bring from outside gives us something to work against. You can argue with the other person's ideas. You can answer that person's ideas. You can clarify, and you can use a person's ideas to clarify in your own writing, or you can use your writing to clarify somebody else's ideas. Or, and this is a word that English majors like me love, you can complicate, right? You can take somebody else's ideas and show maybe how simplistic they are. There's ways that we can complicate and go beyond that. Or you can use somebody else's ideas in your own paper to help complicate your own ideas. How do we go from a simple idea to make it more interesting? And we're going to work on all of this later in the semester. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing. It's helpful to know how these terms differentiate. So I've got a little bit of a chart here that shows what they are and when you use them. First of all, obviously, when you quote somebody, you're quoting their exact words, while paraphrasing and summarizing are going to be written in your own words. You're taking somebody else's ideas and expressing them in your language. Obviously, therefore, if a quote is exact words, it's going to be the exact same length as the original. A paraphrase is going to also be about the same length. I mean, that's what a paraphrase is. You're casting a quote in your own words. A summary, by definition, is going to be shorter than the original. You're not only writing in your own words, but you're trying to boil it down to some of the more important points. So you're actually going to make it shorter, and this is the primary difference between paraphrase and summary. Now, what kinds of things do we quote, paraphrase, or summarize? Obviously, if quoting and paraphrasing are the same length as the original, we tend to use these for short passages. The reason that you don't want to quote too long is quoting should only take up about 10% of your paper. So if you have a page-long quote in your paper, you better have 10 pages after that explaining why that quote's important. Okay? Same thing that goes with paraphrase. If you're spending an entire page delivering somebody else's ideas in about the same length, you're going to have to justify to your reader why you're doing that. You're going to have to bring in your own ideas. Therefore, we want to keep our quoting and paraphrasing to save them for shorter passages. Summary is precisely used to boil down longer passages for our writing. So it's a way of dealing with longer pieces of text that we just can't fit into our own writing. Another way to think about why we use exact quoting versus paraphrasing and summary is that we quote when exact words matter. When the original is said in a particular way, it's either unique, you can't find another way to say it. It's interesting, the way that the person has said what they've said is worth remarking on. To kind of point where we're going in the future, when you quote, after you quote, you're going to actually want to take some time to paraphrase to try and explain why what you think the quote means and why it matters. But we'll talk about that next week. Meanwhile, if you're going to cast things in your own words, what this means is the exact way that the original writer expressed them doesn't necessarily matter. What matters are the ideas. And so you want to get those ideas across to your reader in the clearest, most efficient way. And so you'll either use paraphrasing or summary. Okay, so I think how to quote is somewhat obvious because you're using exact words. The technicalities of it will go into more detail next week. I'll give you another video on how to quote. But since you're writing a summary this week, let's talk about like steps you can use to actually paraphrase and summarize. First of all, before you can paraphrase and summarize, you have to make sure that you fully understand the original. And I think the best way to do this is to use the cocktail party test. Imagine that you have to go to a party with a bunch of, snobby, uptight people walking around in fancy dress and eating little cocktail weenies on the end of a stick, that kind of thing. And they want to hear what you have to say about this original text. You want to be able to actually talk about it, you have your short version, your 1-minute version, your long version, your 5-minute version. But someone says, hey, I hear you're reading Martin Luther King's Letter from Birmingham Jail. Can you tell me something about it? Before you can actually write a paraphrase or summary of it, you should be able to talk about it. This means you understand it and can give it to somebody else. The other reason you want to do this is that when you go to write a paraphrase or summary, it's absolutely important that you put the original aside and write your paraphrase or summary without looking at the original. I think the reason for this will become very apparent if you try and write while looking at the original. If you're looking right at somebody else's words, you will not be able to come up with a new way to say it. By putting somebody's writing aside, this gives an opportunity for you to digest the material, think about it, and write from your point of view, which is what we're doing with summary. And this will become really apparent why we're doing it this way when we write the second summary of Martin Luther King. Okay? Next, after you've actually written, you need to make sure you go back and check that your paraphrase matches the sense of the original, just to make sure you got it right. And make sure that you use quotes to identify unique terms. Any of those key words that you did not change, even if it is just one word. And I'll show an example of what I mean by key terms later on. Now, if we're talking about paraphrasing, summarizing, quoting, the issue of plagiarism always comes up. So let's take a moment to talk about what plagiarism is. Okay, and I'm going to do this by going through some examples. We'll do a Dora Explorer kind of exercise here. Well, I'll show you some examples and I'll ask you whether you think they're plagiarism or not. Feel free to shout at the screen, just like you do when watching Dora the Explorer. So here's the original. It's important then to recognize not only that not all cheating is plagiarism, it's even more important to see that only an extremely small proportion that actually occurs is cheating. This is a quote from a text by Russell A. Hunt. He's a professor at a Canadian university. Now, obviously, if I write in my paper, it's important then to recognize not only that not all cheating is plagiarism, it's even more important to see that only an extremely small proportion that actually occurs is cheating. I think anybody would say, yes, that's plagiarism. I have reproduced his exact words in my paper. Okay, but what about this? What if I rewrite it in my own words and say, we must recognize that only an extremely small proportion of plagiarism is cheating? Is this plagiarism? Yes, it is. Because if you notice, I have not changed some key terms, i.e. recognize and extremely small proportion. These are Russell A. Hunt's words. Now notice I haven't highlighted plagiarism or cheating. Although these are key terms, they're vitally important. There's no other way to say plagiarism. There's no other way to say cheating. Okay. What matters are words that give a kind of intellectual flavor, right? It gives a sense of what Hunt has to say about these things that I'm copying, right? So that's plagiarism. But what about this? What if I completely rewrite it so that I take out all of his words, other than plagiarism and cheating, which we've talked about? And I say, although most instructors tend to think that plagiarism is cheating, they are mistaken. Very few cases of student plagiarism actually meet the definition of cheating. Is this plagiarism, even if it's in my own words? Well, yes, because I haven't given credit to Hunt. Because although I changed the words to my words, the ideas are still his. I have to give him credit. According to Hunt, although most instructors tend to think that plagiarism is cheating, they are mistaken. He argues that very few cases of student plagiarism actually meet the definition of cheating, right? If you think back to earlier in this video when I said, why is it that we are summarizing, paraphrasing, and quoting, it's important to realize that I'm trying to bolster my own writing. I'm trying to show my ideas and connections to others, so I want to give credit, right? So I can imagine Hunt's quote sitting inside my own writing, both as support for it and as a way of giving my readers an idea of the larger topic, all right? So remember this, plagiarism is borrowing words, grammatical patterns, and grammatical patterns doesn't occur that much. It's not something that most writers need to worry about, but it's borrowing of words or ideas, opinions, or arguments without giving credit to the source. If you give credit to your source, you're not plagiarizing. Pure and simple. So how do we avoid plagiarism? A lot of this is similar to what we said about paraphrase and summary. First step is approach the original analytically. You want to think of it as a piece of evidence that you need to work with. We're going to do a lot more of this when we get to Chapter 7, which is how to use evidence analytically. First step, actually, though, is to take notes as you read. It's important when you read something that you take notes. And when you take those notes, differentiate your words from exact quotes. The reason you're going to take these notes is remember what I said before, that you're not going to look at the original as you write your paper. You're going to use your notes instead. This will help you write your paper without looking at the original. Now, if you're writing and you got to keep looking at the original, you got to keep looking at the original, you got to keep looking at the original, this probably means you need to go back and read it again for understanding. Or if you do fully understand it, what it probably means is the exact wording does matter. There is no other way to say it. It's rather unique. And so now it's time to quote. Okay. It might also mean the exact ideas matter, and you're going to need to paraphrase or summarize, making sure that you give credit to the original. Remember, if you borrow any exact words, even if it's only one word, you've got to use quotation marks or block quotes, which we'll talk about next week, to identify where your words end and where somebody else's words begin. And remember, whether you quote, paraphrase, or summarize, you must give credit. We're going to have a whole section on this later in the semester, but there's two ways to do it. The first way, according to use last name, you must give credit to your sources. This is the more elegant and preferable method, or you can put the person's name in parentheses at the end. Quote, you must give credit to your sources, said by me today in this video. All right, have a great week.